A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT.
At Hiroshima, 80,000 people died in an instant. Another 110,000 days, months, and even years later, including a young girl named Sadako Sasaki.
Sadako Sasaki was 2 years old when the bomb destroyed Hiroshima, but she was diagnosed with radiation-induced leukemia 9 years later when she was 11 years old. In an effort to help in her treatment, she followed a Japanese tradition that says if you fold 1,000 origami paper cranes, you are granted health, a long life, a wish. She folded, I think, about 1,300 cranes, but sadly she died of the leukemia at the age of 12 in 1955.
In 2010, Clifton met Sadako's older brother, Masahiro, at the scene of the 9/11 disaster.
Where Masahiro and his son Yuji were donating one of Sadako's last original cranes to the center as a gesture of healing after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And during that meeting, Yuji Sasaki took a tiny paper crane out of a plastic box and dropped it into my palm and said, "That's the last one Sadako folded before she died."
Wow.
And at that point, he and his father asked if I would consider attending the Hiroshima and Nagasaki memorial ceremonies. And we did 2 years later. And not just the ceremonies, we sat down and just listened to more than 24 survivors. And they don't want an apology. They're not out for revenge. They're not angry. What they want is for everyone that they tell their story to continue to tell those stories so that the knowledge spreads of what it's like to live through a nuclear explosion so that we don't do it again. The city was not only flattened by the bombs, but then that started a firestorm that killed many, many more. So physically, the effects were unbelievable, horrendous.
The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
My grandfather did what he did to stop the war and save American and Japanese lives. He wrote that, he said it over and over again. I'm not going to tell a Pacific War veteran or their children or grandchildren that the use of the bomb was a bad idea. At the same time, I'm not going to tell a survivor, several of whom are my friends, I'm not going to tell them it was a good idea. I think my job in all of this is to be in the middle, but more than anything else, to keep encouraging people to be honest and open, the reasons that it was used and the horror that it caused. And what I can say is that my grandfather was an intelligent, thoughtful man. It was a cruel weapon, but there was not a cruel man behind it. So I'll defend him that way.
The other big criticism is that this event, far from giving the world peace, ends up creating a nuclear arms race. Do you think that that's true?
I often wonder what would have happened had my grandfather, for some reason, decided not to use the bombs and just gone ahead with the land invasion of Japan. Not only how many more lives that would have cost, but then where would that have put nuclear weapons? They're already invented. They're already out there.
What's it like growing up in a family that's so deeply involved in arguably the top 10 most significant moments in human history?
My parents didn't tell me my grandfather had been president of the United States. I found out in school. I went into class one morning in first grade, and the teacher said, "Wasn't your grandfather president of the United States?" And I said, "I don't know." And I went home that afternoon and I dropped my book bag at the front door and I walked up to my mother and I said, "Mom, did you know that Grandpa had been president of the United States?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "But just remember something, any little boy's grandfather can be president. Don't let it go to your head."
How do you feel about nuclear disarmament? Is it something that you're intensely passionate about, or is it something you observe?
No, something I'm passionate about when I can help in any way that I can. The number of nuclear weapons, I believe 17,000 some warheads in the 9 nuclear nations. Several thousand of them still on hair trigger alert aimed at old Cold War targets. And now we're doing it and the Russians are doing it, modernizing our nuclear arsenals. It looks like we could be at the start of another arms race. So it's terrifying.
Well, your current president, Donald Trump, has flagged the possibility of resuming nuclear tests for the first time since 1992. What do you think about that? First
of all, I don't know why anybody needs to do that. You know they work. And every time you set one off, you're talking about radiation. You're talking about poisoning the ground. That's madness. I don't know why anybody would do that.
Do you feel like you have a special responsibility because of your family connection to it, or is this really just down to you as an individual and how you feel about all this?
Both, but I take it as a responsibility because of my family connection. You know, I was lucky enough that Masahiro Sasaki sought me out, called me, offered friendship, offered a chance to go to the ceremonies. So yeah, I take it as a responsibility. The family and just as a human being, anything you can do to keep this from happening again, from being even worse.
It's been so good to speak to you, Clifton. I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours because, well, just the scale of what we're talking about and your experience is such a unique one. Thank you very much for sparing the time for us.
My pleasure, Waleed. Thank you.
What a remarkable man. What a remarkable attitude to his grandfather and history.
Very open. Specifically, we spoke for quite a long time, and I specifically asked him about whether he approached this being defensive or not. And he really, really didn't, maybe because he didn't know his grandfather was president.
He gets home from school and they say Granddad was a president.
No.